the Speak, episode 13. Bum 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 bum.
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
Todd Henry is the founder of Accidental Creative, a company that helps creative people and teams generate brilliant ideas. He regularly speaks to audiences about the topics in his book, The Accidental Creative, as well as his latest book titled Die Empty. Todd's humility and passion are something that we all should aspire to, and we talk deeply about how he gets up in front of an audience and gives them everything he's got. Todd, it is awesome to have you here this morning. I have to say it was no accident that you're here today, but it certainly was creative, wasn't it?
It's great to be here, and I'm excited about what you're doing, and I think it's a conversation that needs to happen because, as someone who gets in front of people on a regular basis, it was hard for me to find places to turn to about this topic, so I'm really glad that you're doing this and
Awesome.
happy to be here talking with you today.
Well, good. So, Todd, I heard you speak at a conference a couple weeks ago about your book and the concepts of this notion of accidental creatives. And so we'll dive into that a little bit. But first, I wanted to talk about getting to the bottom of a secret that I know that you have. And it's at this conference, I heard you on the end of the day, or the end of the conference, it was the closing keynote, 9 o'clock in the morning. You get up on stage and you're like this ball of energy and you were incredibly engaging. And on Twitter, everybody was talking about how wonderful this was, that the closing keynote speaker was just incredibly energizing. So what's your secret?
And you said I can't mention coffee or Red Bull, right?
No coffee, no Red Bull.
Other than that, okay, first of all, I was heavily caffeinated, so that helps. Although, I found, and this is like a little insider tip, I found actually that it's better not to drink too much caffeine before I go up, because then it's just spastic, right? Yeah. I wish there was a secret to that, but honestly, I love my topic, and I love getting to stand in the gap and serve people who are in turn doing great work. And so I think probably the energy derives from my love for the topic and my passion, absolute passion for what I'm talking about. And if I can't get excited about what I'm talking about, people aren't going to get excited about hearing me talk about it. And we've all sat through those presentations before where it feels like, okay, this person's kind of phoning it in because they have some information they want to deliver to us, right? And, I've never wanted to be one of those people. So the way I approach it is, listen, I'm going to bring everything I have to what I do. And you know what? It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And sometimes it's not people's cup of tea. There have been some environments I've been in where people, maybe they don't connect as much because they're used to this sort of more lecture-laden kind of thing. And no, I'm up there and I'm telling stories and I'm trying to engage people and bring everything I have to it. But I feel like if I don't do that, I haven't done service to the people who are giving me their time and attention. And because people's time and attention is valuable. Otherwise, they might as well just go sit and read a book or have a conversation with a friend, right? Yeah. So I feel like I have to honor their time by bringing everything I have to that time. The other tip, though, I will say is when you do a closing keynote for a conference, recognize always that the night before is party night, right? People party the night before the closing of the conference. And so you have to bring high energy because they're showing up and they're possibly hungover or they're tired at the very least because they've been out late. It's the last night of the conference. So you have to bring that energy. If you don't, you're going to lose people. And I've seen that happen before as well. Opening keynotes are always easier than closing keynotes because people show up ready to play at the opening keynote. Yes. But by the closing keynote, they're tired, they're dragging. and you have to really bring it, and also you have to close it with something really strong. Final little tip: if you're doing an early morning keynote, get up well in advance, have a good breakfast, make sure that, if you drink coffee, make sure you have your coffee, but don't do it right before your talk, or you're going to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of your talk. Don't do that. But make sure that you're, prepared and ready to go, and you've had some time to break away, contemplate, think about what you're bringing, think about the people you're about to serve, and that way you'll be fresh and ready to go.
Got it. So a lot of passion, some preparation, and just a little bit of caffeine will help.
And a little bit of caffeine always helps. That's right.
Great.
And lots of water. Lots of
water, yes.
Yeah.
Well, Todd, I also wanted to explore with you a little bit about your background. How did you get into, public speaking, professional speaking? Can you share a little bit of your journey and kind of where you began and up until this point in time where now, you are giving keynote presentations?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, I grew up, so when I was growing up, my father was a pastor, right, in this tiny little church in this small town in Ohio. And, I spent every week sitting and listening to him speak week after week after week. And he had these 22-minute sermons he would do. And it was like always 22 minutes. That was it, And, I mean, at the time I was a kid, but, I wasn't really thinking a lot about it. But I think so much of that really was absorbed into how I think about communicating. And, his energy and his ability to drive home a point in such a short period of time, I think that really, really connected with me. So that's kind of one touch point for me. Another one is, I spent a good portion of my, as I now call it, my misguided 20s in the music business, on the performing side of the music business. I did some business stuff too. But as a performer, I pretty quickly figured out that I could get up there and sing and play and do whatever I wanted to do. But if I wasn't able to capture the audience's attention, and enrapture them with what I was doing, I was just background noise. So, as I was performing, so little disclosure here, I played country music. Okay, so like Bakersfield, West Coast honky tonk country music was kind of my deal, right? So that's what I wrote, it's what I sang. I had a band, we traveled. And I mean, we did shows with, Toby Keith, the Dixie Chicks, all these like pretty big name acts, even back in the 90s. And by the way, my little tip on personal branding is do all of your experimenting pre-Google, right? That's the best way because you won't find anything about this on Google if you look for it. Maybe like one or two little references. That's about it. But so, did all of that stuff, and it was a great time. But listen, when you're the opening act, nobody's there to see you, right? You're not going to make an impression. We all know, we've been to shows where the opening act is forgettable. People show up halfway through, they're not really paying attention, and unless they do something to really capture your attention, you're not going to listen to them. And so I figured out pretty quickly, if I want to make a name for myself and for us as we're doing this, I have to figure out a way to capture people's attention. I have to give them, as Nancy Duarte would say, I know she's been on your show, right? You have to give them a star moment, something they'll always remember. And so for me, I played the piano, and for me, that star moment was, imitating one of my heroes, Jerry Lee Lewis. I mean, I would jump up on the piano and I would like play it with my feet and like be banging on it and all that stuff, right? Well, there was a lot of other stuff that I did, and music I played, and I played guitar and sang and all that, but the thing people walked away remembering was the banging on the piano thing. And I had to figure out how to capture people's attention, how to talk to a crowd, the kind of pattern that you do. And so it's funny because as I look back now on that time, I call it my misguided 20s, but it all makes sense in retrospect, because in many ways what I'm doing now is I'm taking this we call it hiding the vitamins in the applesauce, right? I'm taking this stuff I really want people to get and internalize, and I'm wrapping it up in all of this sort of entertainment and energy and story and all of this, but I'm delivering it in such a way that people can receive it and internalize it. I could say the exact same thing, or just like in my 20s, I could play the exact same songs. People would completely ignore it without the applesauce around the vitamin, So you have to package things in a way that people are going to be not only find it valuable, but they're actually going to be willing to engage with it, because you only move the needle if people will listen to you, internalize it, and then hopefully act on it later. So I would say, really, those were kind of my main touch points. And then as I went to launching podcast and a business and doing all the things I'm doing now, eventually writing books and all these things, I just discovered that the best way to get my message out there was through speaking. And that began with the podcast, honestly, you know, and which is really kind of a microcosm of a public talk is all it is. It's instead of, hey, I'm going to get up and give a 60-minute keynote, it's I'm going to give you 10-minute chunks of whatever's on my mind. Yeah. And I really honed my craft and figured out the best way to communicate, you know, through recorded audio. But what I discovered when I started doing it live is, wow, this is really the way that people resonate with concepts. You know, it's one thing to read something. It's another thing to hear somebody speaking passionately about it. And I just discovered this is by far the best way to get to move the needle, to create the delta that I want to create with my work, is to get out in front of people and share it. So
well, I think it's interesting that you talk about like starting with the podcast and how, I mean, you've got a pretty popular podcast and you've been able to connect with a big audience, but to hear you say that the thing that really kind of pushed you over the edge with connecting with a group of people, or, you know, the people who have come to become fans of your work, was through public speaking and being able to get out there and have that, you know, somewhat face-to-face interaction with those individuals.
Absolutely, because podcasting is a passive medium, right? So people feel like when I meet people, when I go out and give a talk at a conference or something, they come up to me, they say, I feel like I know you because of your voice has been in my ear for 4 years or 5 years now through this podcast, which is great. But when I meet people, they always say things like, you're a lot taller than I thought you would be, or, you know, you look different than I thought you would be, or you're older there, you're young, you know, whatever. It's like people have this image in their head, but when you meet people in person and you make that one-to-one connection and people can see your passion conveyed in your body image, they can see your passion conveyed in your tone of voice and your eyes and the way you're looking at them, it just creates a different impression. And for me, so when I go and speak at a conference, like I don't sell books in the back of the room. I don't push people to my, you know, stuff or whatever. I feel like, hey, and there's nothing wrong with any of that, but my thing is, listen, I want to move the needle in your life. If you think that my book would be valuable, if you like what you heard, go get it. That's great, whatever. But I see it as my opportunity to get out and move the needle, create a delta. But one of the gauges I always have of how effective I am in my speaking is how many books they have left in the conference bookstore at the end of the thing. And I've been really fortunate in that, you know, and I always tell conferences, listen, order a lot of books, I'm telling you, right? Because they always sell out. And so for me, that is my gauge. That's the needle for me. I know I've been effective if people say, not only was I entertained, but I'm going to go buy this book and I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to pay like 30% more than I would if I ordered it through Amazon, right? Yeah. Just because I want it right now, because I want to act on this stuff. And I think that's always a good gauge if you're a speaker of how effective you are, is if you can mobilize people to action.
Absolutely. Well, Todd, let's talk a little bit about some areas or a particular area that you may have struggled with when you first got into speaking. You know, is there anything that you can share as far as, you know, was it delivery? Was it content preparation? Were there any things that you had difficulty with when you first started really going down this path?
Yeah, I think probably expectations were the biggest thing for me. I didn't know what to expect when I started doing this. You know, I mean, we all go to conferences and we see, you know, events, and you hear phrases thrown around like the speaker circuit, right? As if there's some kind of circuit that everybody goes on, and they, you know, it's like you go from place to place, like the county fair or something. Right. You know, it's not like that. It's not like that at all. And I think for me, the biggest hurdle was coming to understand the business and understand really the proper avenues for me to get in front of people. And so the best advice that I could give to anyone kind of starting out, you know, based on my experiences, listen, you have to get your reps in, right? You have to get in front of people. It's better to make your mistakes in front of 100 people in a small conference room somewhere in a hotel than it is to make your mistakes in front of 3,000 people in a large conference, right? And some people who have their platform grows quicker than their voice does. You know, there are two elements of effective communication. There's platform. You have to have a platform. You know, Mike Hyatt talks about this, right? To be able to have the venue in which to have influence, you need a platform, right? That is your platform. But you also have to discover your voice. You have to figure out what is it I want to fill that platform with. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, their platform grows faster than their voice, meaning, they have these big arenas of influence, but they haven't yet figured out exactly what they want to say. I was fortunate in that my voice came over a long period of time where I was kind of figuring it out through the podcast and content and the things I was creating, and I wrote a book and all these things. And then I had a long season when I first started seriously, speaking to 50 people in a conference room at a Holiday Inn, right? Yep. And trying to get kind of like being the opening act, and now I'm really fortunate in that, like the event that we were at in Washington, DC, where you saw me and others, I'm regularly getting to speak in front of 1,000+ people at these larger events. But you know what? I honed my chops in front of small groups of people over a long period of time who maybe weren't very responsive, and I had to figure out what's the rhythm of my talk. That's probably where the energy came from, to be frank. It's probably from having to bring so much energy just to raise the energy level of the room, because people were sitting at me, staring at me with their suits and ties on, saying, "Why did you bring this guy in to talk to us?" Right? So that's my best advice is hone your chops. Don't turn down anything at the start. And people will tell you other things. They'll say, no, you need to protect your brand. You don't want to. My advice is, listen, anytime people want you to get in front of them, especially if you're just starting, do it. Get in front of them. And having a book isn't a ticket to, endless speaking opportunities, right? You need to be out there in front of people. You need to continue building demand for what it is that you do. And get in front of as many people as you can. Get your reps in, as a friend of mine told me once upon a time, and that's really been, at the end of the day, what's made all the difference in my speaking style. That's,
I think, a really huge takeaway for all of us, because I think many of us fall into the trap of thinking, oh, well, I'd love to be a public speaker, a professional speaker. I'm going to get a coach. I'm going to think through, like, what's my content, and then I'm going to start doing it. And it's like, we got to take a step back and realize, it's those small incremental things, the repetition of doing it over and over. And like you said, it's almost like exercise. You can't expect that you're just going to walk out in front of a stage of, in front of 3,000 people and be able to deliver. It's small incremental steps that get you there. And that's definitely something that we all need to take to heart.
That's right. Like, so if you listen to the masters of speaking, the Zig Ziglars of the world, right? And it's funny because I'm listening to a Zig Ziglar audiobook right now, and man, the world lost a treasure, right? When he passed away, but he gave the same talk so many times. If you listen to different tapes, it's the same cadence, it's the same everything. He had done that talk so many times, but every time he did it, it felt like it was the first time he was giving it, because of the energy and the engagement he had and all of these things, right? He had polished his craft over time. He could command a room. It seemed effortless, right? But it wasn't effortless. It was the result of a lot of honing and practice and figuring out, where do I put a pause? Where do I stand? How do I look at people? Pausing to let people take in an idea, using humor to soften people, and then delivering a hard blow, right? Yeah. All of those things take time to figure out. And you can look at it from the outside and say, oh, I could do that. But it's only once you're in the moment that you really start to figure out your own style and your own craft. And that's the other thing. So, there's a lot of advice about how to communicate, how to use your hands, and how to stand, and how to pause, and all those things. I was in Istanbul giving a keynote last fall, and the person presenting right before me was presenting about how to be an effective communicator on stage. So no pressure, right? You're following the guy who just told you all of the things you should and shouldn't do. And so I get up there, and of course I probably break every single rule that and I even made a joke about that, like, oh wow, what a person to follow. Not to mention that I was speaking to a mostly European audience, right? Yeah. So there's already kind of a little bit of a language or culture barrier there. But I spoke to him after. I said, hey, do you have any tips for me, any advice for me based on what you just saw? And he said, I could give you a list of things that would help you improve technically as a speaker, but I'm not going to do that, because your passion for your topic transcends all of those things. The energy you bring because you care so deeply about the cause that you're standing in on behalf of, it transcends all of the little quirks and the little stutters or the incorrect pacing or whatever you're doing. So I'm not going to tell you that, because I'm just going to mess you up. So you can study public speaking and become a good automaton, mechanical public speaker. But your passion will always trump all of that, as long as it's clearly communicated and you have clear action points for people. What do you want them to know and what do you want them to do? If you can figure out those two things and communicate them clearly in a compelling way with a passion in your presentation, it will always trump any technical perfection that you may aspire to.
Excellent. Well, Todd, we've got just a minute or two left, and I wanted to, and this may be a big one to answer, but let's see if we can get it in. You've got this concept that you talk about, and it's the topic of a new book that's going to be released this fall. And it's this idea of dying empty.
Right.
So without getting too much into the whole die empty concept, is there anything that you can share with us about how you bring this idea of leaving it all when you give a presentation?
Absolutely. Listen, you get one shot when you're in front of people. That's it. That may be the only time you ever get to share what's important to you with the audience. And it is a tremendous privilege, right? Yeah. There is no audience that you will ever be in front of that is less than a tremendous privilege and opportunity for you to get. I mean, people's time and attention is extremely precious. So the question that I would pose to people, and this is largely the subject of the new book, Die Empty, is, will you lay your head down tonight satisfied with the work that you did today? Are you always aspiring to, well, I'm speaking to 100 people. I wish I was speaking to 500 people. Oh, I'm speaking to 500 people. I wish I was speaking to 1,000 people. Oh, so, are you falling into that trap? Or are you saying, listen, I'm going to do everything I can with what I have in front of me, with this opportunity that's in front of me right now? I don't care if it's 5 people around the table or 1,000 people in a conference room. I don't care what it is. Are you bringing everything you have to what you do? Because, and I will say this, Brian, over time, if you make it a practice and a habit in your life to bring everything you have to whatever opportunities you have, those opportunities are going to grow. You're going to find your voice, you're going to build your platform, and you're going to end up having more of a sphere of influence if you're willing to say, I'm going to bring everything I have to what's already in front of me, instead of always wishing for something more. And that's probably the thing that has been the biggest area of impact in my life and in my career. Is every time I come in, I ask myself before I go in to speak to a crowd, what difference do I want to make through my efforts? What do I want people to know? And what do I want them to do, more importantly, right? Because I believe that the practical side of what you present is far more important than inspiration. People need to be inspired, but there's a shelf life to inspiration, right? Yeah. But if you give them something practical that they can walk away and do a handful of things that they can go and start doing the next day because they're so inspired, you will transform their life. You will create a new vector for them. Yeah. So, do everything you can with every opportunity you have, and never see an opportunity as too small, because if you add up enough of those small opportunities, they become something really big.
Great. Well, these are some awesome insights. A big thank you to you, Todd, for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. If you liked what today's guest had to share in our discussion, you may want to grab an audio copy of their latest book for free by going to WTSaudiobook.com. That's WTSaudiobook.com.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whattospeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.